What was the darkest episode from a TV series you've ever seen? Scrubs and My Lunch A is about a medical error. One character dies, and her organs are donated to 3 people on the waiting lists, who all die brutally. Turns out she had rabies, and the routine screening tests didn't pick that up. Small correction, it wasn't that the tests didn't pick it up. It's that Cox didn't get them done in the first place. J.D. tries to say testing for rabies would have been irresponsible since the patients in question didn't have time to wait, and that's when another of the recipients, who could have waited, dies. And that's what pushes Cox over the edge. Nah. This is a big correction. If Cox had tested for it and the tests somehow messed up, he wouldn't have felt so bad. He would have been angry at the lab or whoever. He was devastated because he blamed himself for not having the tests done, even though JD correctly reminds him that rabies isn't something doctors test for because it's so rare. He wasn't about to die. Was he, newbie? The delivery of that line is seared into my brain. Me too. That, and when JD says, the second you start blaming yourself for people's deaths, there's no coming back. And Cox turns around with tears in his eyes and replies, "Yeah, you're right. I was thinking of this episode too." Or the one where you find out Brendan Fraser's character had died and was a hallucination of Dr. Cox at the end of the episode. Where do you think we are? My screw-up was that one. Where's your camera? Aren't you gonna take some pictures? Scrubs going from comedy to existential horror in 20 minutes flat. It did that pretty regularly, and very well I think. Meanwhile in the background plays How to Save a Life while Dr. Cox breaks more and more until he's finally done and leaves. Remember what you told me? The second you start blaming yourself for people's deaths, there's no coming back. Yeah, you're right. Walks out, episode ends. Damn, absolutely phenomenal acting in that scene. I still think about it. When JD tried keeping Dr. Cox from walking out by giving his words about blaming yourself for patients' deaths back to him only for Cox to just agree and continue walking was heartbreaking. Being a doctor is no small job. I'll go to the next episode, My Old Lady. Scrubs is amazing at laughing for 23 minutes, then punch in the face and tears and melancholy till you go to bed. The Battle of Winterfell in GOT. Couldn't see shit. The darkness is a metaphor for darkness. Ugh. I hosted a watch party the night that aired and everyone was blaming my projector for the darkness. Got a series of apology texts the next morning. The first and last time I tried to pirate a movie, I'm in my 40s, it was one of the Lord of the Rings movies. It took ages, early 2000s, but I was optimistic. The reviews said things like nice quality, but a little dark. Someone had taken the trouble to encode 3 hours of nothing. I still occasionally think about that person's dedication to trolling an audience they wouldn't get feedback from. I was a background actor in this episode and everyone asks whether you can see me. I tell them I can't see the main actors. You joke, but it was perhaps the worst shot episode ever for a mainstream show. I remember looking forward to the big battle scene and all I could make out were the whites of eyes and an occasional glint of metal. I was in disbelief. I also remember looking forward to a big battle, only for the Dothraki to charge in like idiots and the defenders place their trebuchets in the front lines. The final episode of MASH where Hawkeye is in therapy talking about the chicken getting killed. That episode is traumatizing for all ages. I think when you're a kid, you understand that she killed the baby. When you're older, you understand that she did it because Hawkeye told her to keep it quiet. Did she misunderstand him? Did she panic? Or was it just the only way she could think of that would keep the baby quiet permanently, so that everyone else on the bus could survive? And without any answers to those questions, how can Hawkeye deal with his guilt? When you think what it implies, she kills the baby just based on a few words and a look. She must have thought he was capable of killing her, the kid and other passengers in moments, which meant she had experience which made that a very real possibility for her, enough to take extreme action. Alan Alda was in an episode of 30 Rock and he walks into people practicing a skit and he goes, "A guy crying about a chicken and a baby?" I thought this was a comedy show. That rightly is the part that gets remembered, but the plot with Winchester befriending the musicians and then them all getting killed is a tough watch as well. Charles shattering his records is soul-crushing. His final line when he says music was his only escape from the war and now it will forever remind me of it instead is so brutal. This episode was brutal, because for a moment you get to see Charles with a heart. Then you see it shatter. Brutal, yes, but I was more impacted by Colonel Blake's death. He was honorably discharged and headed back home to his family, only to have his plane shot down over the ocean. No survivors. Yeah. Jesus Christ. I saw that as a kid, and it stuck with me for 40 years. It wasn't much less traumatizing when I rewatched the show a couple years ago. The House MD episode where Kuttner commits suicide. You're absolutely gutted by it because he was an amazing character, but how it just comes completely out of nowhere. I'll never forget watching that episode live on TV and just sitting there with my jaw dropped. It was a very accurate portrayal of how it's not always noticeable when someone is going to take their life, as well as the fallout afterwards. I just watched this last night, and you're right. If I remember right, Kel Penn, who played Kuttner, went to work for Obama's administration and left the show. But damn, it came from nowhere, and I absolutely loved his character Kuttner. I think they handled his death quite well, showing that there aren't always obvious signs that someone is unwell and wants to end it. It really came from nowhere. Except one vague scene a few episodes before when he argues with a coworker, Tob, about a suicidal patient, and Tob was calling them selfish for attempting it, but it wasn't really touched on. I've had my battles with depression, and we had a colleague take his own life over Christmas holidays. Everyone, including myself, were shocked, including a guy that had worked pretty much side by side with him for 20 years. He was upbeat, cheerful, and friendly. I had a bit of a think about it, and later, at a team brief, I revealed that I had fought similar demons, and that he was probably coming to work to not be that person. Amber's death is a pretty dark one too. Wilson's heart is a really fucking hard episode to watch. Thanks Obama. The actor who played Kuttner actually left the show to go work in the Obama White House. So it's one of the interesting reasons for an actor leaving a primetime show. Final EP of The Wire Season 4. Those kids never had a chance. Everyone failed them, Dookie in particular. The home episode of The X-Files. Insane it ever got aired at all. This was, without a doubt, the craziest, scariest thing I saw on TV as a kid. It starts with a bunch of kids accidentally discovering a baby corpse, and it hits the gas and does not let up from there. The part where they find the mama sister under the bed, yuff. Dexter, when Rita is killed, came here to say this. Trinity was such an incredible season, gut-wrenching ending. The season 5 finale of House. He finally admits he has a problem. He asks Cuddy to help him detox. The will they/won't they finally pays off, and they share a passionate night together. The next day, Cuddy is acting like nothing happened. Because nothing happened. In the wake of Amber's death, House had been taking higher and higher doses of Vicodin, and it got to the point where he was having vivid hallucinations. The moment he realizes that what he thought was Cuddy's lipstick is actually his Vicodin is brutal, and the look on House's face when he goes to see Wilson is haunting. People always wonder what rock bottom looks like. That is what it looks like. The moment when Amber leans in and mocks him had my blood run cold. Lane Price's body being found in that one episode of Mad Men. That was brutal. Jared Harris is such a great actor. That episode on Star Trek Voyager where the crew is getting sicker and sicker and they don't know why, only to find out they are copies of the crew made on a planet the OG crew visited. A life form copied all of them and the ship and went to space thinking they were the real thing. Once they figured out they were dying because they are copies and need crucial elements from their home planet to survive, they turned around and sent SOS signals to the real Voyager. Only by the time the real Voyager got to them, there was only specks of matter floating in space. The SOS signal was also so warped that the OG Voyager didn't even know what the floating stuff meant. I cried at that one. Next to last episode of BoJack Horseman, The View from Halfway Down. There were a lot of bleak episodes of that show, but that was rock bottom. That one was fucking rough. Every time I got to an 11th EP of any BoJack season, I knew I was in for a good cry sesh. The poem sticks with me. The final episode of Blackadder goes forth. The most tragic episode of a comedy I've ever seen. Set in WW1. The characters, who are soldiers, spend the whole season trying to get out of the trenches, only to have to face going over the top and certain death. Absolutely heartbreaking. And you think it's happening on Armistice Day, and they've actually lasted until the end. And then one of the characters says the date, and it's a year too early. And you just know what is to happen. Fade to poppy fields. I've watched that episode multiple times and never realized the importance of the date. That just adds an extra layer of meaning. Apparently they had filmed a scene where they all get brutally gunned down in humorous ways, but something happened to the film. So instead they did the slow-mo shot of what they had with the sad slow theme song. Works a lot better than what they originally planned. We did it. We survived the Great War of 1914 to 1917. Oh no. British comedy has a talent for really dark humor. They can take the worst of situations, but still manage to put jokes in there while remaining 100% sympathetic to the situation. They make jokes, but don't make fun of the situation. The episode of Only Fools and Horses where Cassandra has a miscarriage was like this. What a situation to weave into a fucking sitcom. But they did it and it was a masterclass. In the over-the-top episode of Blackadder, when Hugh Laurie's character George's unfailingly bright and British character breaks and he just said "I'm scared sir" breaks me every time I see it. Don't forget you stick, Lieutenant. Thank you sir. Wouldn't want to face a German machine gun without this. The field turning to poppies is so powerful. Loch Henry on Black Mirror. It was not one of their more techie episodes, but HOLYFUCK was it ever traumatizing. I grew up in a town with a major news-making serial-killing couple who did simply heinous things that were similar to this episode. And it flashed me back to that. It rocked the city's world when it happened. Lots of Black Mirror episodes. For me, White Christmas is one of the darkest ones. If you think about it, imagine living for trillions of years alone with no way out. Or The Punishment of Black Dude, who was innocent in Black Museum. Completely agree. The mother entering the room whilst dancing on that old videotape is burnt into my memory. Dinosaurs. It was a 90s comedy show, and the last episode is the complete opposite, where the world ends and it's a serious dark drama and a shock to the system as a 9-year-old. Here's a sample, but best you see the entire episode yourself to really understand what I mean. The Walking Dead episode with Carol and the 3 girls. Trying not to give spoilers. This and the baseball bat scene at the beginning of Season 7 are forever scarred into my brain. Look at the flowers. Twin Peaks Season 2 finale. We were left with that ending for 25 years. The body, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Maybe not the darkest, but it's bleak. Accurately conveys the emptiness and confusion that comes after the loss of a close one. The fact that it comes out of nowhere is a natural death in a world of the supernatural. And such a heavy episode in a show that tends to be a comedy led to it hitting harder than a show about fighting vampires had any right to. The opening scene. Glad someone mentioned it. That episode hits like a truck. Came here for this. Such a brutal episode. Got a red wedding. Pretty fucked up. A pregnant woman gets stabbed in the baby. Stabbed in the baby skull. Seymour episode from Futurama. Definitely one of the saddest in the series. Jurassic Park. I won't even watch that one anymore. Rugrats on Mother's Day. Yes, it's a children's cartoon. But when you watch it as an adult and understand why Chucky's mom isn't around, it's fucking soul crushing. The Pit. 6 p.m. HBO's Chernobyl. When the divers' flashlights went out in the basement and the Geiger counter was clicking. Clicking, clicking. I had nightmares. Even though I know full well that all 3 divers survived. Better Call Saul, Season 6 Episode 7 Plan and Execution. I won't give spoilers without a tag since it's still a relatively recent show. Jimmy and Kim had been dancing between raindrops for a long time, tempting fate with their greedy and selfish actions. It was bound to come home to roost at some point. And now for my spoilery opinion. Howard's death came directly at the hands of Lalo, but Jimmy and Kim were equally as guilty. They fucked with Howard out of pure spite, pushing a flawed but otherwise decent guy into a spiral that led him into the path of criminals. Fuck both Jimmy and Kim. Rhea Seehorn is still the love of my TV life, though. I said this above too. But BB and BCS are both shows that are about the cost of crime, and in particular how that cost is often paid by innocents. The worst things that happen to people in these shows happen to people who do not deserve them. BB is about a guy causing pain who reacts to that in one way, and BCS is about a guy causing pain who reacts to it in another way. Think all the way back to the very early episodes of Breaking Bad. Maybe it was even the first episode. Walt steals chemistry supplies from the school, and the janitor is suspected and gets arrested for it because he'd done time for petty crime and was in possession of a joint. I've forgotten certain details now, so I clearly need to rewatch both series. Band of Brothers, S1E9, Why We Fight. Opie sacrificing himself in Sons of Anarchy was pretty dark. He made the decision, but then we actually had to watch it happen. Oof. Also Tig's daughter. Oof. Ozymandias, third to last episode of Breaking Bad. Spoilers below, of course. Obviously, the show itself is pretty bleak in general, revolving around criminal activities and how it ruins people's lives. But this episode really pushes things to another level. To kick things off, you have Hank's murder. Family member of Walt. Prominent character from the beginning, gets murdered in front of a pleading Walt. Then Jesse gets captured and turned into a meth-cooking slave. Then things come to a head and Walt nearly kills his own wife. Junior's life comes crashing down before his eyes as he sees his father's true colors for the first time in the series. Skylar screaming in the street as Walt runs away with their daughter. Like I said, the show itself is rough, but man, this episode is one of the few that will really fuck with you emotionally. Not a silver lining in the entire thing, depression and pain from start to finish. I think the one where Walt could have saved Jane was pretty fucking bleak, and then didn't tell Jesse for a while. When Tony killed Christopher on The Sopranos. Dude. Agree. The one where they kill Adriana is pretty bad, too. That episode aired the night of my grad school graduation. I had to start a state bar prep course the next day and couldn't focus. I thought she was driving to DC. Or when Carmela dumped that ziti in the garbage can. Tragic. So what? No fucking ziti now? Where Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob kill the health inspector. Black Mirror White Bear. Shut Up and Dance. Really dark and masterful twist. Haley's death on Criminal Minds. I worked the case, daddy. First season of American Horror Story where they show a school shooting from the perspective of the high school kids in the school. That episode is a rough watch. The Lonely from the Twilight Zone. There are a lot of episodes from the Twilight Zone, they are rough. One that I haven't seen mentioned but deserves one. Mr. Robot. 4.7. That episode is beyond heavy in a revelation and how it hits you like a truck. The whole episode builds in a dark way despite the tone of the way it flows stylistically. Full Metal Alchemist, Brotherhood, Poor Nina and Doggo in EP4, An Alchemist's Anguish. The Dear Lady episode from Reservation Dogs. I love seeing Auntie Tanis do something dark though. Game of Thrones, The Red Wedding. That scene, and also I thought when they burned Lady Shireen all while no one helped, was just awful feeling. Damn, it's a show, but I loved that character. I'm still broken up about it. Children of Earth, Torchwood, Scott's Tots. Bad, but not as bad as Prince Family Paper. It's the only episode one have to skip. I like this observation. I wouldn't have thought of this episode as dark, but more ultra cringy. I guess that is a kind of darkness. I don't know if it's necessarily the darkest episode I've seen, but the thing I have found most irredeemably upsetting in a show is when Fred's body is taken over by Illyria in season 5 of Angel. It made me feel physically ill. Ditto for when Wesley dies and Illyria attempts to comfort him by shape-shifting back into Fred's form. I can't handle it. Would you like me to lie to you now? Breaking Bad with the ATM machine and the little boy. Don't really care about the ATM part. But damn, seeing that little kid always brings out childhood memories that I wish I could just delete from my brain. God, that one fucked with me so bad. I'm surprised this isn't a more common answer. I sat there in silence for a while after that episode. Love's Labor Lost. Oh God, this one hurts. What an incredible, brutal, beautiful episode of television. All these years later I still have Kleenex on hand for this one. The episode of Twin Peaks when we learn who killed Laura Palmer. Episode That's My Dog from 6 Feet Under. It's harrowing. That's the one where David gets kidnapped and held at gunpoint, right? I remember watching it with a friend of mine. We both just sat in silence and stared at each other when it was over. Then I think we turned on South Park or something because there was no FING way that was going to be the last thing I watched before falling asleep. Buffy, the Vampire Slayer S6 EP17, normal again. A demon's venom causes Buffy to hallucinate, convincing the Slayer that she's a normal girl in a mental ward. That her parents are alive, Dawn never existed. And her Slayer life is a delusion. In the end she chooses to go back to the world with demons and vampires by saying goodbye to her mom in the mental ward and going catatonic while her mom sobs. They never confirmed which world was real. I'm not going to say it was the darkest of all time, but one I watched recently that had me going, well, that didn't have to go that hard after I finished watching it, was the episode of Strange New Worlds where Lawton traveled back in time to present-day Toronto with an alternate universe Jim Kirk. This is going way back. The episode of Sesame Street when Hooper died. Big Bird was so devastated and everyone else was doing their best to support him, but then he goes into Mr. Hooper's store and all you can do is watch this big stupid bird's heart breaking as he hits that stage of grief where you feel completely alone. Dark in a different way, I guess. It had a sweet outcome where the community comes together to comfort Big Bird, and it teaches an important lesson. And I still could not watch that episode again. Nearly 45 years later, this episode is actually darker than you think. The backstory to this episode is that the real-life actor who played Mr. Hooper, Will Lee, died and the producers didn't know how to explain to the kids watching. They went to a children's psychologist and she showed them how to help kids/families how to deal with death. The part where the cast were telling Big Bird what happened. The cast were only able to get through one take because by the end of it, they were all emotional/overwhelmed and couldn't go on. The Shield, I'm sorry. Lem, family meeting, JFC, absolutely gutted. Had to pause and rewatch a couple of times because I was like, Taff just happened. The last episode of Dinosaurs when they all are watching TV about to be killed. Yeah. Great kids TV there. Definitely the episode of Walking Dead when Glenn died. I came here specifically to say this. I would have loved to name something more surprising, but honestly it is what it is. I rewatched it for the first time since release earlier this year. The sense of dread, the graphic nature.
So
Many people stopped watching. It drains your soul. While we're on the subject, also when Carol had to kill that little girl Lizzie. It was horrifying, but necessary, which made it extra horrifying. Pike scene in season 11, zombie Sophia coming out the barn. Herschel death, Shane and Rick in the field at the end of season 2, Rick crying afterwards knowing he didn't want to but had no choice, and Daryl finding his zombie brother Merle are all emotional scenes too in my opinion. Battlestar Galactica when they finally found Earth. The Criminal Minds where the guy made marionettes out of people. Was that the one where the girl wakes up faster because she was diabetic? If so, it was a woman that turned them into dolls. Criminal Minds was good at this. The guy with the ex-movie star mother. The guy whose family was dead the whole time. He was alive yesterday, kidnapped kids' parents. The former football star who locked his old teammates' daughters up in the cellar and made them pick which of them would die, and then when they decided he dropped in the hammers. The episode with the wife whose whole family was taught to abuse, verbally and emotionally, her by her husband was always really chilling to me. He was alive yesterday, killed me. So hard to watch. Christmas episode of The Bear. Family time is dark AF. Fishes. I'm surprised no one has mentioned the two-parter, The Bicycle Man, from Different Strokes, wherein a pedophile tries to molest Arnold and Dudley. It was shocking because it was normally such a bland, predictable 70s sitcom, but also because it didn't hold back in showing the grooming tactics. Good one. Surprisingly intense for an otherwise upbeat show. Also ironic given the Cosby era was kickin'. I never would have suspected Mr. Carlson. That episode of Rugrats where Phil and Lil argue over who is the favorite and Phil imagines a scenario where he's utterly neglected and Lil is doted on. For some reason, the extremely vivid and exaggerated image of a completely neglected toddler in a kids show felt dark as fuck at the time. Nell's episode of The Haunting of Hill House, aka The Bend Neck Lady, scared the shit out of me, and was tragic at the same time. Handmaid's Tale, pick any episode, but especially the one where the two young folks are forced to commit suicide by being pushed off a high diving board with weights attached to their ankles. For me the worst was the episode where they went to DC and you see a handmaid with the rings in her mouth for the first time. Like, we knew they were mutilating people this whole time, but to see that on top of everything else they do to these women they also silence them like that, and then on top of that they have to wear what's basically just a dressed up muzzle. Likely just to hide how unsightly the rings are for everyone else to look at because the rings already silenced them. It just broke me. Season 4's premiere, watching through it for the first time, was extremely disturbing to me. Mrs. Key's story was just depressing as all hell, but to have June's interactions with here, especially the ending shot, was just revolting. Home The X-Files. Nobody mentioning that time Punky Brewster got stuck in an old refrigerator. Every other episode of Black Mirror. Torchwood. Countryside. No alien monster, just some very messed up people. Black Mirror lots of episodes. But for me it was one where soldiers don't see their victims like humans, but like those moving targets without sound like in some video game, so to make killing easier and soulless. Thinking about that coming to real life in some time made me physically sick. The episode of Baby Reindeer where Donnie Dunn takes a bunch of drugs with his mentor. 33 from Battlestar got supplanted by Ander S2E3. I could hardly breath. That said, I guess documentary doesn't count. That episode of Adventure Time where the deer had hands. Fresh Prince. And there's a few to choose from. Will gets shot trying to protect Carlton during a mugging. Will and Carlton get racially profiled driving a car for a friend of Uncle Phil. Roseanne had a glut of dark episodes. Jackie's boyfriend beats her up and Dan kicks his ass. The girls trick Roseanne into thinking they were excited about spending Mother's Day with her, but it turns out to be a trick so they can go to a concert. Dan finds Rosie crying and tears the girls a matching pair of new assholes. I'm amazed no one has said Why We Fight the Band of Brothers episode where they find the concentration camp. It's absolutely fucking brutal. Dark. Season 3 Episode 5, Life and Death. If you've watched up to that point it's devastating, but I imagine the story could stand on its own without any backstory. Fucking bleak. Such a great show. Best show ever. Outlander Season 1 Episode 15. That made me completely full stop the show. I can't make it through it no matter how good I'm told it gets after. Scrolled way too far to find this. 100% yes. I couldn't finish the show for 2 years when I first watched it. I still skip the episode when I'm rewatching. The episode in Growing Pains, where Carol loses her first boyfriend from drunk driving. She gets to see him, and by the time she gets home she learns he died. Tracy Gold did a phenomenal job in acting that out. To a 9-year-old that was crazy. To see him alive and okay, not okay, but you don't know that yet. And then learning in the span of a commercial break he's dead. The ATM episode of Breaking Bad. I find this to be the right Breaking Bad episode. The child of those drug addicts. It just makes me sick. Sons of Anarchy was a pretty dark show. A few episodes come to mind. The episode where they burn Take's daughter alive in a dumpster and make him watch. That was pretty fucked. The episode where Gemma kills Tara was pretty crazy when it first aired as well. The World at War, 1973. A British documentary series about WW2. Episode 20, Genocide. It is all about the Nazi death camps. With actual footage when the camps were first liberated, and interviews of the survivors. The shots of the piles of stick figure bodies makes you think you have seen the darkest thing possible. Until they show the pillows stuffed with human hair and the wallets and lampshades made of human skin. Buffy, when her mother dies. Mommy. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air when his dad left him and his uncle had to console him. True Blood when Terry organizes his own suicide before they glamour him into forgetting why he wanted to commit suicide to begin with. The episode where the woman dies after giving birth. They fight to save the baby and then the mother dies. Jurassic Park Futurama. Black Mirror Black Museum. WTFFFFFF. Many Black Mirror episodes are grim. Extremely obscure shit, but there's a magical girl anime called Ojamaho Doremi. It's for very little kids. There is one episode about a little girl who has cancer. And she fucking dies. It is horrible, incredibly sad. And it comes out of nowhere. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a good thing to have stories like that in children's entertainment. But JFC, I was just watching a cute show. I was not prepared for that. Here's some info about it. Honorable mention, not a TV show, but the made-for-TV movie Threads. That's a film that definitely stayed with me. Nightmare Fuel. The Dexter episode where Rita dies. The episode of SpongeBob where they think they killed the health inspector and they try to hide the body. Not a single episode, unfortunately, but I will never forgive. For killing Mark Green over several episodes, twice. That's what actually stops me from watching it every year. A lot of episodes in Bates Motel. I don't watch too many series, but the Negan appearance one in The Walking Dead was pretty wild. I don't remember the series, Medical. I think, or Grey's Anatomy or ST. Elsewhere, and a very close mother-daughter relationship is established in this episode. Daughter and friend are in a car accident. One of them dies. Survivor is found with ID card, the friend's. Mother is inconsolable, visits daughter's surviving friend in the hospital. Mother vents then rages about losing daughter. Patient is bed-bound and wrapped up and unable to respond. In a fit of anger about losing her precious daughter, mother unhooks life support and kills friend, only to find out later that the patient had friend's ID and was actually her daughter. This gutted me for some reason. How over love and hate and vengeance can cause someone to destroy what is most loved. Breaking Bad had several dark episodes. Jesse's girlfriend's death made me stop watching the show for over a year. The kid on the motorcycle. Peekaboo really does it for me. Surprised I don't see anyone else mention it. Bicycle Man episode from Different Strokes. Sons of Anarchy. The finale was pretty disturbing. The whole last season was difficult to watch. I had to put it off a few times. Basically all of Hannibal. Home. The X-Files. There was an episode of Spooks where they put an agent's head in the deep fryer. Still gives me shudders. The Walking Death with Negan, his Lucille and Glenn. Eenie, Meenie, Miny, Mo. The special anti-drug episode of Saved by the Bell where Jesse becomes addicted to caffeine pills. Episode 8 of Twin Peaks, The Return. The Origin of Evil is Born. The final episode of Dinosaurs. BoJack Horseman's Time's Arrow, where we watch Beatrice's dementia unravel her entire tragic life. Watching someone lose their mind while reliving their worst memories in fragments was genuinely haunting. For a show about a cartoon horse, it gutted me harder than most live-action dramas ever could. Peekaboo Breaking Bad. X-Files Home and something from True Detective Season 1. When Jesse got hooked on caffeine pills on Saved by the Bell. That shit shook me to my core. The Last of Us finale this season.